So, I got really sick. And then the sky turned into hell. And so I took that time I had staying in my apartment to write up this script. And I really wanted to record it earlier, but I didn't have the proper physical equipment to speak into a microphone. But I'm almost better now, so we're going to move forward. Chapter 4, The Fallen Gods. I'm not going to lie. The cover of this chapter scared me. And not in like a thriller way, not in a horror way, in the, oh no, is this going to be overly pretentious and poorly executed way. See, gods and stories about gods have the potential to be extremely interesting, but they are so easy to fuck up. And personally, to me, it was a bad sign that all those Chonians, feels like a slur, were extraordinarily human-looking. I mean, Rob and the tank have bent designs before. It's kind of a big thing with them, actually. But I'll admit, a red flag can be a false red flag, it could be a pink or orange flag that I mistook. It still has the potential to be really good, so it took me a while to realize why, this time around, it was taking me a bit to get around to reading this. After a while, I realized that it's because the first page is really cluttered and busy. There isn't enough color and depth, with the exception of this cube, which doesn't even feel like it's part of the page. This page actually reminded me of a comic series called The Autumnlands, which you should read, by the way, it's really good, that had a lot of shots like this that I had no issue with. So I cracked it open again, and one of the main reasons why immediately became apparent. A big part of it was the line work. There's very little size and color variation in 5YL. I see it even in Rob's modern drawings. He always has issues with using line variation, and it's frustrating. Let's look back at the archaic. As you can see, he took the same line work and did minimal recoloring. I understand that, as an artist, this is a lot of detail and a lot of work to do all over again. But I would do it, because if you do it properly, it should be less work this time around. What makes this background flawed is the inconsistent and seemingly unplanned distribution of work and dedicated time across this piece. Look at this. I'm zoomed out of the page, right? This is how the audience is supposed to view the page. And yet there's no depth, and the background looks way too busy. It feels like it wasn't meant to be seen at a distance, so I zoom in. And now look at the buildings in the bubbles. Am I supposed to zoom in or not? Look at the detail in the Colosseums, the accuracy of the shading. And now look at this. This part works. But Rob clearly didn't know how to balance the two. Now look at the Autumnlands. See how they're able to give the impression of a scenery without adding all that detail. How a lot of details are not inked, but colored and shaded in. You feel comfortable looking at the background from the distance you're at. If you look too close, you'll see it's just an impression of what it's supposed to be. But when you zoom out, you feel the entirety of the piece without feeling like you've missed anything. Now, I get what you're going for here with this character. They bend reality, so they're able to manipulate the border. It's a very cool detail. A detail that I did not catch on my first several read-throughs. Because the border is so plain. It might have worked better if it were like stars or an aura, or even just like a black or white border. Just something else other than the desaturated purple. That's not what a border usually looks like. It's so easy to miss. And compared with the significance of what they're doing, They're so small and way off to the side. I feel like they'd be more important than the cube guy. Now, let's focus on the story. But the strain of this power was not meant for mortals such as ourselves. As we pulled from the nectars of the universe, they pulled back at us. Each breach in time, every shift in reality, it wore our bodies down, making us weak and frail. A very interesting concept. Why'd you downgrade the background, though? Was it to show the drainage more? But this felt like the nectars of the universe, like God was showing itself and its might and beauty. And the foreground were the consequences of what happened when you dared to try to tamper with that. It felt like you took God out of the panel. From this weakness came anger. From this anger came war. And people can say that's irrational, but people are irrational. That much power made us reckless, and our race was dying, our universe collapsing. We needed a new home. Rainbow pocket sand. Okay. Awkward hand posing and coloring.
It looks like God was reminded, oh shit, your project is due in 5 minutes. He's like, oh fuck, okay, here's the universe.
I actually like the archaic better, and I feel like the recalibration should have had a more minimal change. I don't have criticisms. Not for the writing. I'm captivated by the story. The one line I would change is, "This is my story." It's a little overdone. Kind of takes away from the gravity of the situation. Zim! It's so good to see you! I bet from the intro and the last video, you were sort of expecting me to jump right into that. I will. Right after I'm done with this chapter. Okay, this is a great concept. I love this. And pairing Dr. Animo and Technus together. It's like a no-brainer partnership. And now the tone is ruined. And it's not because of the style and color of this exclamation point that is incredibly jarring compared to the rest of the page. What makes me mad is that this shouldn't ruin the tone. Vlad is a campy villain. His presence shouldn't signify that things are serious now. And you killed Gurr. I like this. I like that he got his ass repeatedly handed to him by a child. Very canonical. I really like this concept. I like the integration of both the original Race Against Time canon and the Ultimate Alien / Omniverse canon. At first I was a little resistant, but I have to admit this works really well. The designs of these bends are just a little busy, but they're really good. Alex did a really good job on these. This shot is really good. See, I feel like I'm yo-yoing looking at this one image. I see the background, I see Zim, and then I see Eon and what he's doing to Technus. And I'm not saying Technus can't be serious, but when I say I'm going to bookmark this, I'm going to approach this in the same video I'm talking about. So, alright, this is a short chapter. Originally, I was going to make a separate video called The Zim Problem. But since this is such a short chapter, I think this is the perfect opportunity to mash the two. And especially since this video is mostly compliments. But before I get to that, no, it does not. Vlad has never come to me as a Voltron space type. God, I miss campy Vlad. I miss him so much. I want him to do something silly. I want him to come into a room and suddenly feel like, oh, things are going to get interesting. Not, oh, things are going to get interesting. But moving on. Let's just jump right in. The Zim Problem. I've debated on whether or not I should talk about this right now or wait for the next 2 or 3 chapters. However, I feel like this is a good place to lay the foundation, and expand on it in future videos when the topic comes back up. And besides, I've pulled the I have a problem with this, I'm going to talk about it in the next video card way too many times. A definite weakness I need to overcome. So, there are two primary ways to view fictional characters: as people and as tools, specifically narrative tools, constructs for delivering some kind of message. And these are not mutually exclusive. You can blend the two quite a bit. There is no necessarily wrong way to use a character, but the way that Zim's being used here wastes a lot of his potential, and disregards a lot of foundational messages and values that Zim was built on.
Because, the major tenets of the show are sarcasm, cruelty, and violence. Affection and, warm, fuzzy things, anything that would inspire, "Aww, it's not in the show."
And Rob is far from the first, or last, or only person to make this mistake. Now, I'm going to be conflating Zim and the show itself quite a bit here, and that's because I think they're so deeply and fundamentally linked that you can't really separate them. Zim represents his world, and so does every other character in Invader Zim. Up front, I want to admit that I didn't want to rewatch the entirety of Invader Zim and give myself depression, but I felt like it was necessary to at least watch a handful of episodes to help me refresh my memory of Zim, and to aid in me putting all my feelings into words. You see, Zim, along with a lot of Yonin's work at its prime, is a commentary. It is a grim, misanthropic commentary of humanity, from the perspective of someone who is depressed and misunderstood. It's spiteful, it's massively nihilistic, it spends all of its time highlighting everything from the futility of day-to-day life to the worst aspects of humanity, and actively mocks anyone that attempts to have hope for the world. That being said, I felt it was crucial of me to rewatch Enter the Florpus, which was simultaneously incredibly tonally different from the original series, while still feeling comfortably like it was a part of the franchise. Enter the Florpus is written by the same person who was depressed and bitter all those years ago, but now he's felt love. Now he has real hope. That's what it feels like. He's gained the ability to trust, to feel comfortable when people genuinely seem to care about him, rather than paranoid, convinced that this is just a precursor to everything going wrong. Just to clarify, I'm not trying to psychoanalyze Mr. Vasquez intentionally. This is effectively a narrative I constructed through my own experience and how I interpret the show. This isn't me trying to explain Yonin's life. This is more an art piece based on a personification of the world of Invader Zim. This movie makes the viewer feel like the characters are going to be okay, which is not something you really get from the original series. In the original series, everything went wrong. No one was ever going to be happy or okay. And that was the whole joke. It was the joke because that's what the writers believed accurately reflected reality. And it was refreshing at the time for many people because it was preceded by the toxic positivity that saturated children's media. Now, to be clear, that wasn't the best answer to it. Steven Universe did a lot better with tackling deep issues and confronting pain without falling into total despair. But moving forward, Invader Zim means a lot to me because of the way the entire world of Invader Zim was a commentary on the most negative aspects of life. Zim is more than just haha tacos, funny zoom-ins and screams, and oddly pitched tones of voice. If you can't see past that, you've completely missed the point. I feel like the way Zim's being used here is the equivalent of adding a massive chunk of ginger while you're making a smoothie. It doesn't work like the other ingredients you're adding. It's too jarring. I can also see it the other way too, like adding no more than a teaspoon of broth to a soup. Why did you put such little priority into something that should be so much bigger? Let's briefly look at him as a person rather than a tool. These aren't hard lines, but this leans more into that. What my rewatch of the initial series helped me understand is that, despite the jokes made in the show, Zim is a formidable threat. He is incredibly dangerous. He is very talented and very deadly, and would probably succeed if he weren't so inattentive, overeager, and self-absorbed. He legitimately is one of the best Urkin warriors. You can tell there was a clear reason he was in Operation Impending Doom 1. He just lacks proper direction. It just feels so... It's so sad to see all the other characters get this edgy, take me seriously, we're threats, it's real now treatment. While Zim is just still the comedic relief. It's a waste. Zim has the potential to be taken seriously, as is the case with basically all other comic reliefs. And I want to make that clear. I'm not saying that he can't be a comedic relief, but he and what he represents shouldn't be relegated to just the comedic side character. This comic is not pure comedy, so Zim shouldn't be treated as a purely comedic character. More importantly, the world of Invader Zim shouldn't be treated as a purely comedic character. It shouldn't be treated as just a background. There's so much you can do. There's so many ways you can work with this. But he's kind of just a toy, a mascot. And the way he's being used as a comic relief is overly jarring when compared to the rest of the story. No other character is treated like this. Not only that, but the way all the other characters are treated is in such incredibly stark contrast to Zim that his presence is completely disorienting. Everything I said earlier is essentially an argument to keep him in the comic. Because, with the way he's used right now, it doesn't work. The way he's being used now, he shouldn't be here. Pick a tone and stick with it. And if you want to make a tone change, or break the tone occasionally, do it with purpose. Have clear intent in mind. This is sloppy. This is how a child would introduce Zim into their fanfiction. So that's why I was so upset at the end of the last video. That's why I stopped reading the first time around. You need to use characters properly. You need to use properties properly. To use stories and narratives properly. If you don't, the whole thing falls apart. And it just feels shallow. I hope you're still watching, Rob. I really do. Because the further I get into the comic, the more I will stray away from critiquing the art, and the more I focus on the writing. There will be more to come, and I have a lot to say.
I have an announcement to make.
Halfway through editing this video, a friend I've been consulting to make sure I don't go full YouTube critic in these, asked me how the video was going, and what it was going to be about. I told him, yeah, half of it is basically a video essay about Zim. And so he goes, hey, fun fact, did you know that Zim was going to have a larger role in the comic, but his role was minimized when Enter the Florbus came out? I'm sorry, what? So I get the screenshot of the wiki, and lo and behold, due to the movie Invader Zim, Enter the Florbus, giving Zim's show some justice, Zim's role was reduced in 5YL. This kind of floored me. It gave me the impression that he was more focused on campaigning for shows to go back on the air than he was in actually writing a story. And I recognized that I was giving him the least charitable interpretation of this. I was probably overreacting, so I went to the actual wiki for the comic. That is 5yl.fandom.com/wiki/5 years later. And I read, It is meant to do justice to the respective franchises as they were mistreated by their networks towards the end of their run, despite the incredible amount of potential the shows have. That's a little aggressive. I mean, yeah, I think networks and producers often cause problems with most franchises they handle, due to the nature of networks and producers, through capitalism. But that's kind of the point of all fan works. To create something for the franchise without the limitations imposed by producers and censors. 5 years later isn't really unique in this regard. Then I found a fun little tidbit in the trivia section. Rob seems to have done some kind of interview. It says that he released statements, but I have no idea what this is in context to. It's really bizarre. I don't know who is asking the questions, who the interviewer is. There's no source. I don't know if this is random questions throughout the years or if he's just asking himself these questions. I don't know. It's strange. And I quote, "How do you make sure the comic is not simply just another fan fiction?" Who is asking this? What kind of question is that? What's wrong with something being a fan work? What the hell does just another fan fiction mean? What is this if it's not a fan creation? And it's not fan fiction because it's a comic. It's a fan comic. The question's not even right. Rob answers, "In terms of writing the series, the core ideals I focus on are 1. Characters, ensuring the characters seem consistent with their canon selves. They need to believably act, speak, and have grown in a convincing way so that readers have a much easier time allowing themselves to get into the story." I mean, it's good advice to give fan creators, but I'd like to remind you that this is in the context to the question, how do you make sure the comic is not simply just another fan fiction? Which I still don't understand why that's a bad thing. Rob, I feel like you need to pay more attention to how your self-praise affects others. Specifically how you're kind of putting down all other fan creators in this answer. His campaign for his work to be seen as the official continuation of Ben 10 and Danny Phantom instead of a fan creation feels incredibly arrogant. Like, yeah, I'm finishing the series. As if that's not demeaning at all to other fan creators. Like nothing else can be taken seriously except for his stuff. I don't know. It comes off as if he's ashamed to call his stuff fan content. What's wrong with that, though? And what's weird is, 5YL is incredibly fanfiction-y. It's the most fanfiction-y fanfiction to have ever fanfictioned in the history of fanfiction. In terms of, like, what you would expect from a fanfiction. The first chapter specifically feels like Ben's being puppeted. Like Kuro's holding up Ben's corpse and waving his arms at me. He knows what Ben would be like on paper. He knows the motions. He knows what he would act like in a teaser or a trailer. But I don't really see his character here, at least not in the chapters I've seen so far. At best, it feels like a new writer was introduced to the show, but he only got a brief synopsis of who Ben should be. But I am in the 3rd chapter of what is supposed to be a 14-chapter story, so maybe I just gotta wait. But I hope that the whole fanfiction question interview thing was just a misunderstanding on my part, and/or I hope Rob's views have changed since then. Fanfiction has a really rich history, and has the power to do some incredible things. You don't have to say that your work isn't just another one of them. You don't have to petition it to be the official continuation of the show. You could just have it exist as a fan work that you've put a lot of dedication and passion into. It doesn't have to be more than that. Because it doesn't need to be.